She was 8 months pregnant when her mother-in-law slid a letter across the breakfast table and said, "Pack one bag and leave." No argument, no warning, just a suitcase already packed by the door. Proof they had planned this long before she ever walked into that room. Her husband stood there, said nothing, stared at the floor, and she walked out. What the Prescott family didn't know, what no one knew, was that her father had spent 30 years quietly building something in the silence. Not a house, not a business, a fortress. $14 billion, hidden inside shell companies, private equity funds, and one irrevocable trust, all in her name alone. And her 29th birthday, 6 weeks away, the family that threw her out like unwanted furniture had no idea they had just handed her the keys to their own kingdom. The people who try to break you sometimes give you the very thing you needed to rebuild stronger than they ever imagined. If this story hit something real inside you, stay with us. Every week we bring you stories about women who were underestimated, overlooked, and counted out, and what happened next. Hit like if you believe patience is its own kind of power. Drop a comment, has someone ever underestimated you? And subscribe, because the best part of this story is just getting started.
I still remember the first thing I noticed was the sound of that silver letter opener she always used. So precise, just like everything else in that mansion. Margaret Prescott put the paper down on the table, her glasses catching the morning sun. Her posture, her blouse, her expression, all of it was perfect, like always. She looked just like a woman who was simply getting rid of a piece of furniture that no longer fit her design plans. "We've had the guest house prepared," she told me, "but under the circumstances, we believe it's best you find permanent arrangements elsewhere." I was just standing there in the dining room doorway, a room where I'd had breakfast for 3 years. My ankles were swollen, my back was killing me, and I was swimming in your father's old college sweatshirt. I was 8 months pregnant with you. For a second, I didn't even understand. "I'm sorry," I said. "Could you repeat that?" That's when she finally looked at me, not with cruelty, but with something colder, the detached look of someone closing a deal they'd planned for ages. "The Prescott family has certain standards," she said, folding her hands on the table. "Standards we should have made clearer when Donovan brought you home. Our attorney has been consulted. The prenup is quite comprehensive." My hand flew to my belly, just an instinct to protect you. "I'm 8 months pregnant," I said. The words were so quiet, almost a question, as if I had to remind them of this simple fact. "Yes, dear," Margaret said. "Which is why we need you to leave now. Before the baby arrives, it will be cleaner." Cleaner. That word just dropped into my chest like a stone from a great height. I looked from her to Garrett Prescott, who was pretending to read a newspaper in his chair. I looked at the morning sun on that beautiful Persian rug I used to love. Then my eyes found Donovan, still standing in the doorway. He'd been there the whole time. He wouldn't come in. He wouldn't say a word. He was just staring at the pattern on the rug. The way you look at something when you can't bear to look at the people in the room with you. I remember fumbling with my phone in my pocket. Lock, unlock. I almost cried out his name, the way I always did when I needed him. The voice I thought he always answered to. I put the phone away. "Donovan," I said instead. He cleared his throat and adjusted his cuff, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "Claire, my mother has some valid concerns. I'm carrying your child." I said it so simply, but the silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock on the mantel ticking away the seconds. Garrett turned a page of the paper he wasn't reading. "The car service will take you wherever you need to go, Margaret said, already moving on, this whole conversation over for her. I had Rosita pack a few things. One bag. The lawyers will handle the rest. One bag. After 3 years, my whole life was meant to fit in one bag. I stood there for a few more seconds. I think, just waiting. Some little part of me was still sure someone would step in and say, "Wait, this is wrong. She's family." But nobody did. So I walked to the front door, and there it was, a single black suitcase on the marble floor, right next to the flowers. Margaret had fresh flowers delivered every single Monday, and my bag was sitting right beside them. It was so much heavier than I expected. Isn't it strange, the little details that finally break you? It wasn't her words, or the look on her face, or Donovan standing there like a ghost. It was the weight of that bag. That's what told me this was all carefully planned long before today. I picked it up and walked out. The car was already there in the driveway, black with tinted windows. The driver was new, a stranger, another small, calculated cruelty. I got in, the door shut, and I just watched the front of the Prescott mansion through the dark glass for the longest time. The door never opened. No one came out. So I took out my phone and called the only person I could. Renee answered on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" she said, her voice bright and normal like it was just any other Thursday. "Renee," I said, "I need you." Something in my voice must have told her everything. There was maybe a second of silence. "Where are you?" she asked. "In a car they sent for me." I pressed my hand against the cool window. They kicked me out. A pause. Then I could hear her controlling her voice, keeping the anger locked down for later. "Claire, are you safe?" "I don't know," I said, and it was the honest truth. "I'm coming. Stay on the phone." And I did. I watched the whole estate, my whole life, disappear behind those perfect green hedges and the big iron gate. Then I put my hand on my stomach, and you kicked me, hard, 3 times. It was like a message. "Okay," I thought. "I hear you." I pressed my palm right where you kicked. I didn't cry, not then. Things were moving too fast inside me for grief. Grief comes later, you know? This was different. This was the shock of watching the picture of your life crack right down the middle. I thought about the morning I found out I was pregnant, sitting on the bathroom floor with the test. I was so scared and so excited all at once. Donovan came in and found me, and he got right down on the floor with me. He said, "Claire, this is the best thing that has ever happened to me." And I believed him. I believed him completely. Renee's voice on the phone brought me back. She was so steady and warm, something solid to hold on to. "Okay," she was saying. "Here's the plan. You're coming here. You're putting your feet up. And then you're going to tell me everything. And when you're done, I'm finally going to say what I've wanted to say for about 2 years." "What have you been wanting to say?" I asked. "Later," she said. "First, you come here." I remember leaning my head back against the car seat and just closing my eyes. "Okay," I told her. "I'm coming over." The city was a blur outside the window, just ordinary life, you know? A man with his coffee, a mom with a stroller, a little dog waiting at a corner. All so normal, but it felt a million miles away. Renee's apartment. Oh, it always smelled like vanilla and those dryer sheets she's used forever. It was cozy and cluttered in the best way, with books and plants and photos everywhere. It was a real home, not a showroom. She had me put my feet up on an ottoman before I was even all the way on the couch. I could hear her in the kitchen, fussing around. She was filling the kettle, clinking mugs, keeping her hands busy, before saying what was really on her mind. That was always Renee's way. I'd known her long enough to know what all that racket meant. "So, how long has his mother had it in for you?" she asked, her voice perfectly steady. She doesn't hate me, I said. But then I thought about that dining room, about Margaret's hands, that letter opener. She doesn't hate me, I tried again. She just never really saw me. I was just the girl Donovan brought home from the wrong side of the tracks. You grew up in Connecticut, Renee said, bringing in 2 mugs. Not the right part, I mumbled. She gave me that look, the one I always loved, so direct and honest. What did Donovan say? She asked. I held the warm mug in my hands and just said, nothing. Nothing, really. He'd sent a text about an hour after I left. I pulled out my phone and read it to her. Claire, I am so sorry about how that went. Can we talk when things settle down? Renee just stared at the phone, then at me. When things settle down? She repeated. Yeah, when things settle down, I said. You're 8 months pregnant, she said, her voice getting a little tight. I know. You're 8 months pregnant, and you're sleeping on my pull-out sofa. Your pull-out bed, I corrected. A bed, she said, setting her mug down hard, with a metal bar in it I've been meaning to get rid of for 18 months. And he wants to talk when things settle down? He didn't say that, he said, when things settle down. Then I sighed. I don't even know what the difference is. The difference is he's acting like it's a hurricane that just blew through town, like it was some random storm that had nothing to do with him. I didn't answer, just stared into my mug. Of course, I couldn't sleep that night. I was in her little home office, on that pull-out, with that metal bar digging right into my back. I'd shift one way, then the other, and Eleanor would do these slow, lazy rolls inside me, like she was turning over in a dream. The room was so quiet, just the hum of the city and Renee's refrigerator. And that's when my mind started going. It went all the way back to the beginning, to the night we met at that gallery, how Donovan just appeared next to me. He said something smart about the painting, something that made me think he actually saw things. As we, nice, you know, that I was meeting someone real. But then my mind kept going, through 3 years of little things. The Christmas Margaret made a dig about my cooking, and Donovan just laughed with her. It was a tiny laugh. I told myself it was nothing. Or the gala where she introduced me as his wife. But, with this weird little pause, a hesitation I convinced myself was just how she talked. 6 months before, she'd suggested a woman with my background would find motherhood a real challenge. I told myself it was nothing. For 3 years, I had been telling myself it was all nothing. Oh God, I thought, I was such a fool. Every single sign had been right there, clear as day, and I had just refused to look, because looking would have meant I had to do something, and I loved the little life I'd built for us. I picked the pretty picture over the truth, every time. I was so sure I'd married a good man. My whole world was built on that idea. At 6 in the morning, I called him. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice all thick with sleep. It hit me then. He had slept while I hadn't. Claire said, he said. I need you to tell me what happened, I said. Not what your mother thinks happened, what you decided. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, choosing his words so carefully. The family has concerns about the direction of our marriage, he said. The sentence was so slick, so practiced, it took my breath away. Say that again, I said, my voice barely a whisper. There are concerns, Donovan? My voice didn't even tremble. That sounds like a press release. Talk to me like a person. Another pause, even longer this time. My father had a business deal with your family a long time ago, he said, and his voice was quieter now, less polished. I could almost hear the shame in it. Something went wrong. My parents feel the marriage was a mistake, given the history. A business deal? My hand gripped the phone. What business arrangement? I asked. I don't have all the details. What business arrangement, Donovan? Silence. Claire, I think you need to talk to your mother, he finally said. There are things about your father's estate, things I wasn't aware of until recently, things your family. He just trailed off. But in that silence, I heard it all. He knew. He'd known something before we were ever married, and now that the Prescotts were done with whatever deal they'd made, I was just being thrown away. And you know what? I wasn't sad. I was furious. I'm going to talk to my mother, I said, my voice cold as ice. And then I'm going to find out exactly what your family knows about my father. And after that, you and I are going to have a very different conversation. I hung up the phone. Then I called my mother, Diane Whitmore. She picked up before it even rang twice, like she'd been holding the phone, just waiting. Claire, she said, and her voice sounded like someone who'd been holding her breath for years, waiting for this exact moment. Mom, I said, what do you know about Dad's estate that I don't? A long, heavy silence. I need you to come here, she said. There are things I should have told you ages ago. Things your father... He asked me to wait for the right time. And I thought, I'm not crazy. There was always something they weren't telling me. I'm on my way, I said. I sat up on that lumpy bed, found my shoes and my coat, and knocked on Renee's door. I have to go to my mother's, I said through the door. I'll explain it all later. Do you need me to drive you? Renee's voice was right there, wide awake. She'd been waiting too. No, I said. This is something I have to do myself. I walked out into that early morning air. The city was just waking up, the light all gray and sharp. I got in my car, pointed it toward Connecticut, and just drove. I was driving toward whatever secret my father had left behind for me. The house in Fairfield, it looked the same as it always had, white with black shutters, and that big oak tree I used to climb. I saw the bird feeder Dad put up for me when I was 9. He refilled it every single Sunday. I just sat in the driveway for a minute, looking at it. I thought of all the Saturday mornings inside that house, the smell of pancakes, the radio on in the kitchen, my father sitting there with his paper and his plain old mug, just being his quiet, steady self. It never, not once, occurred to me that he was anything other than what he seemed to be. I went inside. Mom was in the kitchen. She'd made coffee, set out 2 mugs, and put a plate of those butter cookies from the Elm Street Bakery on the table. She had prepared for this. Seeing that told me just how long she'd been waiting for this day. We sat down, and she took both of my hands in hers. Your father, she said, looking right at me, was not the man he appeared to be. I looked at her, and I just waited. He was a private man, intensely private. You know that. You knew he knew. Her hand squeezed mine, and I knew my life was about to change forever. What I didn't know, what he'd asked my mom not to tell me, was what he'd really spent his life building. I asked her, "What did he build, Mom?" And I remember she just took a deep breath. She told me that, yes, your grandfather was a consultant, but that was just the part everyone could see. For over 30 years, he was quietly creating something else, a web of investments in early tech, real estate, and markets no one even saw coming. He had these private equity deals that became enormous over time. She told me he never wanted the spotlight, never wanted any credit, and he set it all up to be completely invisible. He had his reasons, of course. When he was just 29, his partners betrayed him, and he lost almost everything. It took him 15 years to get back on his feet, and she said he was just so determined. He was determined that I would never, ever be in that kind of situation. I remember the kitchen was so still, just the hum of the fridge. Outside, a little bird landed on the feeder. My voice was just a whisper when I asked, "How much?" My mom, your grandma, closed her eyes for a second then looked right at me. $14 billion, she said. In a trust, just for you. It becomes yours on your 29th birthday. Nothing changed, you know? The fridge kept humming. The bird was still there. The cookies were on the plate. $14 billion. I had to ask her to say it again. 14 billion, she confirmed. It's an irrevocable trust, only in your name. He hadn't even included her, because he knew she was taken care of. He wanted me to have... And her voice cracked a little bit then. His exact words, she told me, were absolute independence. Absolute independence. That was from Owen Whitmore, your grandfather, a man who wore a simple watch and drove American cars. A man who sat on our back porch every single night with his paper and some tea. The same man who, every year on my birthday, told me I was his greatest achievement. I remember standing up very slowly. You have to, when you're 8 months pregnant, and holding on to the table. I walked to the back door and stepped out onto that porch. I just stood there for the longest time, breathing in the cool air, staring at that bird feeder. I thought about him filling it every Sunday morning. It was just this quiet, ordinary little ritual he had. He never made a big deal of it. It was just something that needed doing, so he did it. And I thought he knew. Not about the Prescotts, maybe, but he knew something like this could happen. Someone trying to take advantage of you when you're at your most exposed. Someone thinking they have a right to what's yours before you even know you have it. He built me an escape route, honey. He spent 30 years building an escape route and never said a word. He wanted me to live my life without that weight, without that knowledge, until the day I actually needed it. I remember putting my hand on my belly, right where you were, and I whispered, "Your grandfather was a very interesting man." I took a deep breath of that cool morning air and let it out. Then I went back inside, sat down, picked up my mug, and looked at my mother. "Tell me everything," I said. And she did. She talked for 2 hours straight. She told me about an attorney, Sylvia Holloway, the one person he trusted completely, who had been holding on to all the documents for 4 years, just waiting for me to call. Mom explained how Dad had structured the trust to close every possible loophole. He'd even planned for the chance that someone might marry me just to get to the money, and he'd made sure that was legally impossible. The whole thing was set to transfer to me, and only me, on my 29th birthday, which was just 6 weeks away. And then, honey, the memories started coming. It's funny how that happens, when one new piece of information makes you see your whole life differently. I remember Donovan's family asking about my background, his mother Margaret trying to subtly figure out what my dad did for a living. I remembered how strangely relieved she seemed when I told her my father had passed away, and how Garrett Prescott once asked me, so casually, if I was close to any of my dad's old business partners. I remembered how Donovan had once ended a phone call the second I walked in, saying it was just my father's people, when I asked. Just his father's people. I hadn't thought a thing of it then. I hadn't questioned any of it. "Mom," I asked her, my voice low, "did the Prescotts know about the trust?" The look on her face told me everything before she even spoke. "Sylvia thinks so," she said. "There's paperwork that suggests someone was looking for your father's estate documents about 4.5 years ago. Before Donovan and I had even met. 4.5 years. He didn't just happen to see me at that gallery opening. He was sent there to find me. And a thought just landed in my mind, perfectly clear and quiet. I deserved better. My father knew it, and he had spent 30 years making sure that when that time came, I would have exactly what I needed to walk away with my head held high. "I need to talk to Sylvia Holloway," I said. My voice was perfectly calm. It was the kind of calm you get, not because you aren't angry, but because you see everything with absolute clarity. She's been waiting for your call for 4 years, my mom told me. Sylvia Holloway's office wasn't at all what I had imagined. For a $14 billion trust, I expected marble floors and a huge law firm. Instead, it was a little brownstone in Hartford. You walked up 3 steps to a dark green door with a brass knocker. Inside, it was all dark wood and bookshelves, and it smelled like coffee and old books. It had that special quiet you find in places where very serious work gets done. It was all business, no show. Sylvia herself was 62, with silver hair, and she was dressed in navy blue. She had this stillness about her, the kind you see in someone who's been keeping a huge secret for a long time and has learned how to carry it. She stood up when I walked in, and she had this look on her face I couldn't quite place at first. It took me a second to realize what it was. Relief. "You look just like him," she said, around the eyes. We sat, and she offered me tea, but I said no. I just folded my hands on her desk and said, "Tell me everything." And she did. She told me Owen Whitmore, your grandfather, started building all of it in his mid-30s, 15 years after that awful betrayal that almost ruined him. He was quiet and methodical, spotting tech investments before anyone else. He bought up property in places nobody was looking at, and set up private equity funds that were so cleverly hidden you'd never find them unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. He wasn't just lucky, Sylvia told me. He was incredibly patient and observant. He understood how markets worked in a way most people don't, and he was willing to wait 10 years for an idea to pay off. "Why didn't he ever tell me?" I asked. "2 reasons," Sylvia said, folding her hands. "First, he didn't want you to be changed by the knowledge. He wanted you to build your own life, on your own terms. He worried knowing about the money would make you too cautious." She paused for a moment. "Second, he was afraid of exactly what did happen. He believed if people found out while you were still young and single, you'd become a target." And he was right, I thought. He was absolutely right. "The Prescotts," I said. "We can't prove it was them who initiated it," Sylvia said very carefully. "But we do have records of a law firm connected to Prescott Holdings searching for your father's estate documents. Those searches happened about 4.5 years ago." She opened a folder. Roughly 6 months before Donovan Prescott showed up at the gallery opening where the two of you met. The room was so quiet. He was never in love with me, I realized. I was an acquisition. The thought didn't even bring tears. It was just cold, hard information. "What does the trust say about marriage?" I asked her. Sylvia turned a page. "The trust transfers to you on your 29th birthday, no matter your marital status. If you're married, your spouse has absolutely no claim to any of the assets. Your father was very clear on that." She said he'd used 3 different lawyers to make sure the wording was perfect. He saw someone like Donovan coming. "He anticipated it, yes," Sylvia said. "Your father was a man who was tricked once, and he spent his life making sure it would never happen again. Not to him, and not to you." I looked at the folder on her desk, and then back at her. "What else?" I asked. And I'll never forget it. Sylvia actually smiled a little. "You really are just like him. He always knew when I was holding something back too." She opened a second folder, this one much thicker. "Your father didn't just leave you money," Sylvia said. "He left you leverage." She turned the folder around and slid it across the desk to me. I looked down at the first document. I read it, and then I had to read it again. "He owned shares in Prescott Holdings," it said. 19%. Sylvia told me he'd bought them quietly over 11 years, using 3 different shell companies. He started about 2 years after the Prescotts first cheated him, a fraud we later learned Garrett Prescott's own firm had a hand in. It took me a minute to process it. My father, who they had ruined when he was just 29, had lost it all. He spent 15 years getting back on his feet, and then, without a single word to anyone, spent the next 11 years buying his way into their world. You see, he was playing a 30-year-long game, and he never told anyone the score, because the only thing that mattered was the final play. I remember saying it out loud, just to believe it. As a 19% shareholder, I'll have a seat at their table. Sylvia just nodded and said their board was restructuring the next month. She'd already been busy. She'd been in touch with 2 other small shareholders, she told me, people who were also unhappy with how the Prescotts were running things. With my 19%, the 3 of us would control 41% of the company. Honey, 41% was enough to start asking questions, to force some real changes. It was enough to make that family realize they'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. They hadn't just tried to take from me. They had accidentally handed me the keys to their own kingdom. That night, back at Renee's little apartment, I couldn't sit still. I spread all the papers Sylvia gave me right on the kitchen floor. There wasn't a table big enough. And I tried to make sense of it all. I sorted them by date, then by type, then by company. I'll never forget Renee, just sitting on her couch, eating a bowl of cereal, watching me like I was some kind of strange creature she'd never seen before. "Your dad owned a piece of that app?" she asked, pointing at one of the pages, "the one I use every single day?" It turned out he also owned part of a media company, 3 hotels out in Colorado, and a logistics firm in Ohio. Renee put her cereal down. "Claire," she started, "I know your father was—" And I just said, "I know, Renee." It was 2:17 in the morning, and my back was killing me. I was 8 months pregnant, sitting on a cold floor, looking at the secret life of a man who drove an old car, wore a simple watch, and filled the bird feeder every Sunday. And then I started laughing. I couldn't stop it. It just bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. The kind of laugh that's been held back for a very long time. Renee just stared. "Are you having a breakdown?" she asked. I told her, "I don't know. Maybe it's the opposite." I looked at all those papers spread out around me. $14 billion, 19% of Prescott Holdings, and a trust fund so perfectly built, it was basically a fortress. My birthday was just 6 weeks away. All I had to do, I thought, was make it there, just get to that day. But the Prescotts, they moved quicker than I thought. Only 3 days after I met Sylvia, a document showed up from Donovan's lawyer. It was a petition to annul our marriage. The reason they gave was fraud. They claimed I had hidden my finances from him before we got married. The irony? Oh, it was something else. Renee read the whole thing twice, very slowly, like she was reading something in a language she knew but couldn't quite believe. She placed it on the table, so carefully. "They're claiming you committed fraud," she said, her voice flat. "Yes," I told her, "me." Can you believe it? The woman who had no idea she had $14 billion was being accused of financial fraud, and by the very family who sent their son to marry me to get their hands on that exact money. "Well, it's creative," I said. "I'll give them that." I had to be dry about it, you know? It was the only way I could talk about it at all. Because underneath all that, there was this thing I hadn't even told Renee, something I hadn't said out loud to anyone, because saying it would make it too real. I was terrified. I was 37 days away from turning 29. I was 8 months pregnant, sleeping on a pull-out couch with a metal bar digging into my back. I had a trust fund I'd never seen and a lawyer I'd known for less than a week. And my husband had responded to my pregnancy and homelessness by serving me with a lawsuit. I went into the bathroom and ran a bath. I sat in it for a good 40 minutes. I didn't wash my hair or anything, just sat there in the hot water, my huge belly like an island, and I just breathed. I remember thinking, I am my father's daughter. He lost everything at 29, and he rebuilt. He spent 30 years creating something so protected, no one could touch it. I was 37 days from my own 29th birthday. I just have to get there, I thought. The baby gave a slow, rolling kick, and I whispered, I know, we're going to be okay. I said it with more confidence than I felt, but I said it. I called Sylvia from the bathroom floor, wrapped in a towel, on the cold tiles. They filed for an annulment, I told her, on the grounds of fraud. And Sylvia, bless her, she sounded completely calm. I expected this, she said. It was one of the first things I learned to love about her. She was never bothered by things that were designed to cause a panic. An annulment, she explained, actually makes transferring the trust much simpler, and it gets rid of any claim they might have on marital assets. I said, but they're claiming I committed fraud. Yes, she replied, and it won't work. The claim requires that you knew you were hiding the information, and we have plenty of proof that you didn't even know the trust existed. She paused for a moment. Let them file it, she said. It actually helps us. Let them file. Those words started to sound less like a defeat and more like a strategy. What do I do? I asked her. Continue exactly as you are, Sylvia said. I have a meeting with Clark Merritt next week. There's another piece of your father's plan I need to show you. Something specific about the Prescott shares. What about them? I asked. Your father didn't just own them as an investment, Sylvia said. He held them as a very specific tool. When you see the whole picture, you'll understand what he was planning. What did he plan? I pressed. Sylvia took a breath. He planned it so that if anyone ever came after you, she said, you would already be inside their house. Donovan called that evening, not his lawyer, but him. I almost didn't pick up. I just watched his name on the screen for 4 whole rings. Then I answered. Claire, he said. His voice sounded tired. Not fake tired for show, but genuinely worn out. In a way I hadn't heard since we were first married, back when he sometimes talked to me like a real person. I need to speak to you, he said. Then speak, I told him. I want you to know, he said. I didn't want it to happen this way. How did you want it to happen? I asked. There was this long silence. I could almost hear him thinking. I could hear he really didn't have an answer. I don't know, he finally admitted. I thought maybe you'd figure it out, about your father, about the trust, and we could talk about it, like adults. And then what, Donovan? I asked. We'd have a conversation, and then what would happen? He didn't say anything. My voice wasn't angry anymore when I said his name. It was something else, something quieter, and much more final. You married me because of the trust. He didn't even try to deny it. I'd been waiting for that moment, and I thought it would feel like my world was shattering. Instead, it just felt like a door clicking shut. The sound of one chapter ending so a new one could finally start. Did you ever love me? I asked. I really wanted to know if any of it had been real. There was another very long pause. I think I did, he said at last. I think that's what made it all so complicated. He loved me, but he still chose his family's scheme. That told me everything I needed to know about what I'd meant to him. I wasn't nothing, but I wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. And I deserved to be more than not enough. I told him, I'm going to protect our daughter. Whatever happens with us, I'll make sure she's taken care of. I hope you'll be in her life, but I'm not going to wait around for you to make up your mind. Then I hung up. I went to Renee's kitchen and just stood there for a long time, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere along the way, I thought, I had made myself invisible, not to other people, but to myself. I kept shrinking, trying to fit into a life that was never meant for me, and I told myself it was fine until I couldn't see myself at all. I decided I wasn't going to do that ever again. I called Sylvia back. "I'm ready," I told her. "For whatever is next, I'm ready." Clark Merritt came to Sylvia's office on a Tuesday morning. He carried a briefcase and had the look of a man who had been waiting patiently for a very long time and was glad the waiting was almost over. He was 60 years old, very precise in how he spoke and dressed. He talked about these enormous amounts of money the way most people talk about a grocery list. It was all just numbers to him. He laid 3 documents on the conference table, one by one. Then he sat down and looked right at me. "Your father," he said, "was an extraordinarily sophisticated man, not just in how much he built, but in how he built it, the architecture of it all." He pointed to the first document. The trust holds the investment portfolio, $14.3 billion, as of last month's valuation. It was a portfolio spread across technology, real estate, private equity, and infrastructure investments that would grow for decades. He then showed me the second document. The trust, as you know, also controlled 19% of Prescott Holdings, which my father bought over 11 years through 3 different companies. Not one of those shares could be traced back to Owen Whitmore on paper. Then came the third document. "What you don't know," he said, "is that your father also reached out to 2 other minority shareholders 4 years before he passed away. One was a retired banker with 12%, and the other was a family trust holding 10%. Both had been in quiet disagreement with Prescott leadership for years." I looked down at the numbers, doing the math. 19 plus 12 plus 10, 41%. "So he built the relationships," I said, the realization dawning on me. "He created the alliance before he died and left it for me to bring to life." "He left nothing to chance," Clark confirmed. He'd been in touch with them for 3 years, explaining just enough of his situation to build their trust. He told them the right time to act would eventually come, and that someone representing his interests would make contact. "He planned for this," I whispered. "He planned for every possibility he could think of." After that meeting, I remember I just sat in Sylvia's parking lot for 25 minutes. I couldn't bring myself to start the car. I had to let it all sink in, to feel real. I just stared at the dashboard, thinking about my father and thinking about Owen Whitmore. I pictured him on the porch in the evenings, reading his paper, sipping his tea, with that simple watch on his wrist. All that time, he was holding this enormous secret, running a 30-year game from a porch in Connecticut. So quiet, so patient, so utterly sure of himself. I thought about him at my college graduation, how he'd given me one of his rare, full hugs, the kind that meant something important. He'd whispered into my hair, "You can do anything you decide to do, Claire. Remember that." At the time, I thought it was just a sweet, standard thing for a father to say, but I understood then that he had meant it literally. For 30 years, he had been building the proof, creating the very conditions where that statement would be financially and legally true. I called my mother. "Did you know about the Prescott shares?" I asked. "No," Diane said. "Sylvia just told me this morning. I've been sitting in the garden ever since." We shared a small laugh, the kind that's half crying, the kind you only share with someone who understands your loss. "He was really something else," I said. "He really was," my mom replied, her voice so soft. "He loved you so much, Claire. Everything he built, every last piece of it was all for you." I stayed in that parking lot until the overwhelming feeling in my chest settled into something I could manage. Then I drove back to Renee's. That night I called Preston Vale, the Prescott family attorney. I still had his number from the annulment papers. His voice was carefully neutral, like a lawyer who'd been expecting a difficult call. "Miss Whitmore," he said, I'm not sure this conversation is. I am the controlling beneficiary of a trust, holding 19% of Prescott Holdings, I told him. I'm also in touch with two other minority shareholders. Together, we control 41% of the company. I thought you might want to discuss this with your clients before next month's board restructuring meeting. The silence on the line was so total, I could almost hear him blink. Additionally, I added, we have records of certain activities from Garrett Prescott's early investment firm that regulators would find quite interesting. Sylvia Holloway is ready to share them if we can't come to a reasonable arrangement. A reasonable arrangement. The same words Margaret Prescott had used when she sent me away. I'll need to talk to the family, Preston said. Of course, I replied. I'll give you 48 hours. I hung up and just stood there in Renee's quiet kitchen. In the stillness of that evening, for the first time since leaving the Prescott mansion, I felt completely and unapologetically myself. The idea of starting over didn't feel daunting anymore. It felt right. Staying there had always been the thing that felt wrong. I just hadn't let myself see it until then. 3 weeks before my birthday, Ainsley Prescott called. I almost didn't pick up, but then I remembered that she had never been unkind. Not an ally, but not cruel either, I answered. I heard what my mother did, Ainsley said, no beating around the bush. Her directness surprised me. I want you to know I think it was wrong. Why are you calling me? I asked. There was a pause. Because my entire life, I've watched my mother behave this way, and I've never once spoken up. You're pregnant, and she threw you out. And I am... She hesitated, then found her words. I am ashamed of us. It sounded like it took a lot for her to admit that. Thank you, I said. That means something. If you need anything for the baby, I'll let you know, I promised. I told Renee about the call later that night. After listening, she said, I never really got what you saw in that family. I mean, I saw what you thought you saw, I just never bought it. Ishan, why didn't you ever say anything? Because you were happy, Renee said so simply. Or you seemed to be. I didn't want to be the one to ruin that for you. I thought about that for a moment. I think I knew, I said at last. I think on some level I knew something wasn't right. I saw all the little signs. I just chose not to look too closely. Yeah, Renee said. We do that. The hardest part, I added, is admitting I knew the whole time. Renee just placed her hand on mine and didn't say another word, which was perfect. My days fell into a pattern. Morning coffee with Renee, afternoon calls with Sylvia, and evening walks around the block. Though they were more like slow shuffles by then, Eleanor was such a presence in my body that every single step was a negotiation. I read through all the documents Clark had given me, learning the shape of what my father had built. I learned the name of every single company, every partnership, every investment. I was learning my inheritance, not as a dollar amount, but as a whole world. I was doing what my father had done. I was preparing. The night my water broke, I was on Renee's couch, watching television and eating crackers. It was the only thing that had sounded good for 3 days. The TV was on, but my mind was elsewhere. I was looking at a photo on her bookshelf from our first year of college. The two of us at some party we couldn't remember, laughing at a joke that was long forgotten. We looked so young, so free of worry. I thought to myself, I wasn't worried back then, because I didn't know what there was to worry about. Now I know, and somehow, I'm still okay. That's really something. And then, I felt it. It was 3:47 in the morning. I looked down, then up, at the TV, then at the box of crackers. Renee, I said. She was asleep in her room. Renee! I called out a little louder. I heard her sit up in bed. What? What's happening? I think, I said, it's time to go. The next 20 minutes were that special kind of organized chaos that you can prepare for forever but still find surprising when it happens. Renee grabbed the hospital bag I'd packed 3 weeks earlier. I found my shoes. She called a car, and I called my mother. Then, after a small hesitation, I called Sylvia. She had specifically asked me to, and I had promised I would. Sylvia answered on the second ring. "It's time," I said. "I'll meet you at the hospital," she replied, and hung up. I didn't call Donovan. It was a conscious choice, a clear one, and I felt no guilt about it. I would tell him afterward. How he chose to react to that news would be his first real test. Labor made me feel more present in my own body than I ever had before. Everything else, the trust, the Prescotts, the annulment, the 41%, the 30-year game my father had played, it all faded away into the distance. All that was left was my body, my breath, the nurses, Renee's voice, my mother's hand on my arm, and the focused work of bringing my daughter into this world. Eleanor arrived at 7:42 in the morning, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair, and Owen Whitmore's nose. I saw it right away. That particular nose, the little upturn at the tip, my father's nose, on this tiny new face. I held my daughter in the bright hospital light and said the name I'd been holding on to for months, the one I chose the week I drove to Fairfield and learned the truth about Owen Whitmore. "Eleanor," I said. "Eleanor Owen Whitmore." Not Prescott. Whitmore. Renee was crying quietly in a chair by the window. My mother was holding a cold cup of coffee, completely forgotten. Sylvia stood by the door, her hands folded. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look like a woman keeping a secret. She looked like someone who had waited a long time to see how a story ended, and now she was. Donovan called 6 hours later. "You know, by then you'd been weighed and measured, all wrapped up in a little hospital bassinet. I'd had some eggs and was trying to sleep, but it wasn't happening." His name flashed on my phone, and I just let it ring. I knew my lawyer would handle it. Everything that needed saying to Donovan Prescott would come from Sylvia Holloway now, and she'd say it better than I ever could, exhausted in that room, holding you. I remember looking at you in that bassinet and thinking how much your grandfather would have loved you. I was so sure of it. He would have loved you with that quiet, steady way he had. He'd have taught you about the bird feeder, and you two would have sat on the porch together. And right then, I knew exactly what I had to do. I was absolutely certain. I closed my eyes and finally, after weeks, I slept. My 29th birthday came 11 days after you were born. It was a Tuesday, I remember, gray and not too cold. You'd been up a couple of times that night, but were finally snoozing in the little bassinet Diane brought over, making those sweet snuffling sounds. Renee was making coffee, and Diane was settled in an armchair, reading. She had that look of someone who's been helping for days and has found her rhythm. Sylvia's text came at 9:14 in the morning. "The trust has transferred," it said. "Congratulations. Your father would be very proud." Then at 9:30, the official papers from Clark Merritt arrived. Formal, detailed, $14.3 billion, all in accounts, under my name. And just like that, thanks to the Owen Whitmore Irrevocable Trust, it was done. I was on Renee's couch, still in my yoga pants from 4 days earlier, nursing you. I hadn't even washed my hair. I was so focused, still figuring out how to be a mother. I just handed the phone to Renee. She read it, put it down, looked at me, then at you, then back at me. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I thought to myself, I'm going to do what my father built all this for. I'm going to live freely. But the first thing I did was call Preston Vale. He answered on the first ring. He'd clearly been waiting. I could hear it in his voice. "Miss Whitmore," he said, all business. "The trust transferred this morning." "I know," I said. "I assume you're aware." "Yes." Then I think we're ready to talk about my terms. I'd been going over them in my head for days, hashing them out with Sylvia until they were perfect. It was never about punishment for me or causing the most pain. It was about you and about clean breaks and about never having to deal with the Prescotts again. The annulment can go through, I told him. I won't fight it. But in exchange, my needs are simple. I want full legal custody of Eleanor, with reasonable visitation for Donovan if he ever truly decides to be in her life. And I want a trust set up in her name as part of the deal. I continued, funded by Prescott Holdings, with the details to be worked out by Sylvia Holloway. I also want a complete list of all our assets from during the marriage, and a final non-disparagement agreement from every single Prescott. I let that hang in the air. In return, I said, I won't take the information Sylvia Holloway has gathered on Garrett Prescott's early business deals to the authorities, and I won't use my shareholder position to force a governance review at the next board meeting. The silence on his end was deafening. I'll need to talk to my clients, Preston finally said. Of course, I replied. You have 48 hours. Sylvia will send over the official papers in the next hour. I hung up and looked down at you. You'd finished eating and were just gazing up at me. Your grandfather would have approved of that, I told you. He was a very efficient man. Preston Vale called back in 36 hours, not the full 48. It told me they were more desperate to make this disappear than I'd realized, which meant my information was even more damaging than I'd guessed. They agreed to everything. I signed the papers that Thursday morning in Sylvia's office. She sat at her desk, and Clark Merritt was there as a witness. You were in your little carrier, looking around like the whole world was fascinating. When the last signature was done, Sylvia looked at me and said, Your father prepared for every outcome he could think of, but I don't think he ever imagined you'd handle it quite this well. I looked at all those signed papers. I thought about your grandfather on the porch, his watch, the bird feeder, all those 30 years of steady, quiet work. He started this, I told her. I just finished it. I picked up your carrier and stood up. I felt lighter than I had in months. Not like a weight had been lifted, but like everything finally weighed exactly what it should. Nothing more. I walked out into that Tuesday afternoon. The sky was still gray, a little warm. It was the kind of day that doesn't feel special at all, but somehow it is. I had $14 billion, a signed agreement, a daughter named Eleanor Owen Whitmore, and no place I had to be. I just stood there on the sidewalk and breathed. Your grandfather had given me true independence. Not just the idea of it, but the real, documented, irreversible fact. I was determined to use it well. The meeting at Prescott Holdings was 10 days after the settlement. I was the one who asked for it. I didn't have to. Everything was legally settled, but I felt there was one last thing to do that couldn't be done by lawyers. It wasn't about strategy. It was personal. I went by myself, wearing a new navy blazer over a simple white shirt, carrying a bag I'd had forever, plain and functional. And on my wrist, I wore your grandfather's watch. Your grandmother had sent it to me after you were born. It fit my wrist perfectly, as if it had always been meant for me. I don't know why, but that little detail felt so important. Like wearing it meant he was there with me. The lobby of their company was just like them. Marble, high ceilings, art that screamed about how much money they had. I rode the elevator to the 14th floor. In the boardroom, Margaret Prescott was at the head of a long table, with Garrett on her left. Donovan was sitting off to the side looking like a boy who'd been put in a chair and told to stay quiet. Ainsley wasn't there. She'd texted me that morning saying she thought it was for the best. I texted back, "Thank you for the call. It mattered." And it really did. I walked to the table. I chose the chair right across from Margaret, in the very center, and sat. I could see her sizing me up. It was subtle, but I saw it. This wasn't the same Claire she'd dismissed from her dining room. She was looking at someone else entirely, and she was figuring that out right then and there. "Thank you for seeing me," I started. "Of course," Margaret said, with that controlled politeness of someone who had no other option. "I want to say something," I said, "before we get into any last details." I looked at Donovan, and for the first time in that whole nightmare, he actually met my eyes. I don't know what I expected to feel, but it was just a quiet sort of pity. Not for me, but for him, for the choices he'd made and the life he would keep living with a family that turned him into someone who could do what he did. "I want Eleanor to know her father, if he chooses to be one," I said to them. "I will not speak badly of your family to her. She can know you all, if she wants to, when she's older. I'm telling you this so you understand that none of this was about revenge." I paused. When my father was young, he was cheated. He could have spent his whole life wanting to get even, but he didn't. He spent it building something. He built it so well that when the time came, what had been done to him just didn't matter anymore. What he created made the old damage irrelevant. I looked right at Garrett Prescott. "That's exactly what I plan to do," I told her. I remember how Garrett Prescott looked at me then, truly looked at me for the first time. He had this expression on his face, you know? It might have been respect, or maybe just the shock of a man realizing he'd lost a game he never even knew he was playing. Margaret said, "Your father was a formidable man." "Yes," I agreed. He was. And Margaret, with no emotion at all, just stating a fact, said, "He outsmarted us." I could only nod. "He did?" After a moment, she looked at me and said, "You are very like him." It wasn't a compliment, not really, but it was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 3 years. "Thank you," I said. "I'll take that." I got to my feet and shook Garrett's hand. I gave Margaret a nod, and then I looked at Donovan one last time. "Be good to her," I told him, "when you're ready." I grabbed my bag, walked to the elevator, and pushed the button for the lobby. When the doors closed and I was finally alone in that descending car, I let out a breath that felt like it had been caught in my chest for months. My father's watch felt cool on my skin, and I remember touching it with my other hand, just thinking, "Thank you for all of it." The doors opened to the city. I walked out. About 6 weeks after Eleanor was born, I bought a house. I could have bought a palace, of course. I knew that, the way you know a door is there, even if you don't open it. I had $14 billion, a kind of freedom most people only dream about in the most practical sense. It wasn't just a theory. It was real, solid, and all mine. But I chose a white colonial in Connecticut on a quiet street. It had a little back garden with an old fence that needed fixing and a porch that faced west. It caught the afternoon sun in just the way I'd pictured for weeks, ever since I decided to leave it all behind and start over. That porch was the real reason I bought the place. I moved in on a Thursday. My mother came over that evening to help me with the sheets and organize the kitchen. We just talked, about nothing and everything, the way people who are comfortable with both silence and conversation do. Eleanor slept in her carrier right there in the kitchen, this tiny sun we moved around. Then Renee showed up that Saturday. She brought good wine for herself, a bag of amazing coffee for me, and a houseplant she swore was indestructible. "You cannot kill this one," she announced, putting it on the counter. I looked it up. Multiple sources confirmed. I laughed and told her I'd killed the last one. "I know," she said. "That's why I looked it up." We sat on that back porch as the afternoon faded, Renee with her wine, me with my coffee, and Eleanor asleep on my chest. We talked the way we have since we were 18 years old. Ainsley Prescott came that Sunday, so tentatively, holding a gift for Eleanor, wrapped in yellow paper. She had the look of someone not quite sure they'd be let in. I just opened the door and said, "Come in, the coffee's fresh." I saw her face for a moment then. Something in her just seemed to let go. That specific kind of relief you see when someone braced for rejection finds welcome instead. "Thank you," Ainsley said. We sat there in the living room, surrounded by half-empty boxes. I remember thinking this friendship would be a slow, careful thing that needed patience, and for the first time, I felt like I had all the patience in the world. A card came from Donovan that week, handwritten on that heavy cream paper the Prescotts used for everything. It said, "I hope she has your warmth and your father's steadiness. I am sorry I was not the man either of you deserved." I read it just once, then put it in a box I labeled Eleanor's, a place for all the pieces of her story she should have when she was old enough, the whole story, not some cleaned-up version. I always believed she deserved the real one. In those quiet hours, I started putting together the things I would tell her one day. Not a lecture, just truths I had learned from that very unique education I'd just been through. I would tell her, "Your grandfather built everything he had so you would never have to be afraid, so no one else could ever hold the key to your life. He didn't build it from anger, though he could have. He built it from love, the same love that made him sit on a back porch every evening and refill a bird feeder every Sunday and tell a little girl she could do anything she set her mind to. I would tell her, people will come for you, and some will be smiling. Watch what they do far more than what they say. The truth always lives in the space between those two." And I'd tell her the hardest thing I ever did wasn't walking out of that mansion. The hardest part was admitting I'd seen the truth all along and had chosen not to look at it. Looking at hard things takes practice, and you can start young. I should have. I would tell her, "We are Whitmores. Your great-grandfather earned that name with 30 years of patient work and quiet love. You were born with it. It's not a burden. It's a gift." One Thursday evening in late October, when the air had that first crisp hint of fall, and the light was doing that special thing it does in Connecticut, long and golden, making every simple thing look beautiful, I carried Eleanor out to the back porch. I sat in this solid wooden chair I'd bought, the kind that lasts for decades. I put your grandfather Owen's watch on the little table next to me. Eleanor was just staring at the light, her whole face so open to it. That pure attention a baby has when they discover something beautiful, and that beauty is just there. I looked at the garden, at that fence that still needed fixing, at the sky turning from gold to amber, and then to that first soft blue of night. I thought about my father, about all he'd built and all he'd quietly loved, and everything he refused to let anyone take from him, or from me. I thought about the fraud at 29, the 15 years of rebuilding, the 30 years of careful planning, and that simple watch he wore through it all. He hadn't done it for power. I finally understood that completely. He did it so I would have a door, one that was always open, that no one could ever shut. A door I could walk through any time and find exactly what he had wanted for me. Absolute independence. And I had finally walked through it. The freedom win, Sylvia had called it. The only victory that lasts. I wasn't in the Prescott dining room anymore. I wasn't in a car being driven away from a life I thought was mine. I wasn't on a pull-out sofa with a metal bar in my back, staring at a ceiling and replaying 3 years of clues I'd ignored. I was on my own porch, in my own chair, with my father's watch and my daughter, watching that Connecticut sky go gold and amber and blue. I thought about what I had figured out over those months, the truth that had pieced itself together in the quiet moments. The shape of what my father had really built. You see, the prison door had been unlocked the whole time. I had been my own jailer. I was so focused on fixing the cage, on making myself smaller to fit inside it, on finding reasons to believe that cage was a home, that I never even tried the door. It had been open all along. I just had to stop fixing the walls and start walking. I looked down at Eleanor. She was still mesmerized by the light, the very last of it, as the sky got deeper and the garden grew quiet. It was that beautiful moment my father had always called his favorite time of day, that pause between one thing and the next. Your grandfather loved this time of evening, I told her softly. He would just sit out here and watch the light change. Nothing else needed. Eleanor made a little curious sound. I think he knew something I'm just starting to figure out, I said. That the ordinary moments aren't just the space between the big ones. They are the big ones. The porch in the evenings. The bird feeder on Sunday mornings. The plane watch. I picked up Owen's watch from the table and turned it over. So simple. Nothing flashy. A watch that kept perfect time and asked nothing of you. I put it back down. He would have loved you, I told Eleanor. He would have loved you so much. And when I said it, that ache I'd been carrying was finally gone. Not the love. Oh no. There was so much love, there was no room left for the ache. Just love, and the evening light, and this new beginning with its wide-open ending. We are going to be okay, I said. Not like I'd said it in Renee's bathroom, trying to convince myself. This time, I said it because it was true, because the evidence was all around me, because my father had spent 30 years making sure it would be. And I had spent the last few months proving him right. And just like that, I knew everything was going to be all right. I remember sitting there as the light just melted away, the sky turning from that bright afternoon blue to the soft, deep dark. You only get right at the start of the evening. The first stars began to pop out. Little Eleanor, my goodness, she'd fallen fast asleep right on my chest, so warm and real. I stayed out on that porch for a long time. I had $14 billion, a signed agreement, and a little girl named Eleanor Owen Whitmore. I had this beautiful white house in Connecticut with a porch that faced the sunset. I had a best friend who'd show up on Saturdays with coffee and plants she swore I couldn't kill. My mother was in Fairfield and called me every single morning. I had a lawyer in Hartford who, for 4 years, never lost faith in what my father had set up. For the first time I could ever recall, I felt this incredible peace, this feeling that I was right where I was meant to be. Not because someone else decided it for me. It was because I had chosen it. I had finally walked through that door my father spent 30 years building for me, and I was on the other side. My whole life was stretching out ahead of me, and I didn't need to ask anyone for permission. As the evening got darker, I just sat there. I was Owen Whitmore's daughter, on my own porch, in the fading light, with my own daughter sleeping against my heart. I was exactly where I had decided to be, completely and utterly free. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.